On this episode of Speaking of Higher Ed, Conversations on Teaching and Learning.
One of the things that this teaches us is that there's already a game out there. Every historical situation, there was a game being played.
There's actually sort of more review of these games than is typical in academia, because there is, a lot of people are looking at it and using it in different kinds of classroom contexts.
How will I succeed in this class? I don't know. I don't have any data. I know how to handle a lecture class. I know how to handle other things. I don't know what I'll do here. When I got to the second game I played two, and I gave everyone the survey. She sent hers back to me with, "I'll play anything, YOLO." You only live once.
Welcome to Speaking of Higher Ed, Conversations on Teaching and Learning. This podcast is produced by the Center for Instructional Innovation at Augusta University. I'm your host, Andrew Everett. The purpose of this podcast is to create a resource to help you create engaging and meaningful learning experiences. This is episode 5. Please share this episode and subscribe. We release new episodes the third Wednesday of each month during spring and fall semesters. Today we have 2 guests with us. They are
Andrew Goss.
Ruth McClelland-Nugent.
Thank you both for being here. Dr. McClelland-Nugent is the Department Chair of History, Anthropology, and Philosophy, as well as Associate Professor of History here at Augusta University. And Dr. Goss is a Professor of History here at Augusta University. So listeners can get to know a little about you. If you'll both tell me briefly about the professional path that led you to Augusta University. Dr. Goss, let's start with you.
Oh, well, thank you, Andrew. I did my graduate work at the University of Michigan. My specialty was Indonesian history, and I wrote my dissertation about the history of science and politics in modern Indonesia. I started my academic career at the University of New Orleans, and after 10 years there, I was fortunate enough to be able to make the move here to Augusta University, where I've been since 2014.
Thank you. I did my PhD at Dalhousie University in Canada. Wrote my dissertation on a topic relating to popular culture in the 17th century. And after some teaching experience other places and a little stint in the Navy, I ended up here. I've been here since 2005. In the Department of History, Anthropology, and Philosophy. And I'm continue to be interested in popular culture, although my research is more modern recently.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing your stories. Let's get into the topic for today, which is reacting to the past. So what is reacting to the past, Dr. Goss?
Well, reacting to the past, or reacting as we sometimes call it, is a series of historical role-playing games that have been designed for the higher education classroom. There are, actually at this point, there's hundreds of games, and about 30 or 40 of them are sort of at a point where they can be used by almost any college instructor, that are set in times of historical tension. And all of them are built around a series of debates about sort of large political or social or cultural topics. The pedagogy is designed to be taught over a series of classroom sessions. So it's not a sort of you arrive in the classroom, you play the game, and you're done. All of them are at minimum 2 class periods long, and they involve both preparation prior to that, in which there are discussion of text, there might be some lectures, there's sort of Q&A about both the game and about the roles. And then there's this series of debates, usually that involve public speaking, and there's conflict, and there's an effort by the students, who are all assigned unique roles, and they have a role sheet that helps guide them in order to achieve various objectives, usually working together with others, trying to be persuasive through speeches, and there's almost always a written component where the students are required to write a paper in the voice of the person that they are playing.
Anything to add?
Wow, that's really comprehensive. No, I think, Dr. Goss is really the expert on this in many ways, and he, excuse me, he's the one that brought this pedagogy to our department. That's a really good explanation, Andrew. Did you work on that ahead of time?
Yes and no. I've been fortunate enough to have been working in the reacting world for a while, and one of the things that I've done in the last few years is go to conferences and try to convince some of my colleagues, both in the history discipline and elsewhere, to give this a try. So that may be some practice there.
Okay, I believe it.
So then you clearly have a passion for this, for reacting. So what excites you the most about using this learning experience in your course?
Well, and I think anyone who's tried it is one of the things you notice quickly is the level of engagement from the students. These are serious games. They might be fun, right? And they should be fun, but that is not their primary purpose, right? They are designed carefully by either by the instructor or by somebody else in order to reach some educational goal. And we have lots of goals for our students, and they're sometimes met, but not always with students being engaged. And so the engagement part is I think the most exciting part of the reacting pedagogy, and is why I keep coming back to using these games.
I really think that for me, one of the most exciting things about using this in teaching history is that it teaches students about contingency. In other words, things that happened in the past did not have to happen that way. That the things were tilted towards a particular outcome. But as the students play through the scenario, they come to understand that their individual choices and their individual goals can tilt it in slightly different ways. And the other thing I love about this is we sometimes talk about gamifying a scenario, but really one of the things that this teaches us is that there's already a game out there. Every historical situation, there was a game being played, and we just make that obvious. And it's interesting because you mentioned it's a serious game. I think sometimes people go, what's a serious game? That sounds like chocolate-covered broccoli, right? That doesn't sound very appealing. But really, it's a sort of a role-playing scenario in which there are going to be winners and losers. And that's a pretty good mimicry of how historical events really happened. So those are the things that I really enjoy about it. Keep me coming back, along with the engagement that Dr. Goss mentioned.
And our students are not reenacting what happened. This is reacting, and there's a lot of work that goes into creating these games. You just don't get an idea and it happens in 6 months. So talk about the process that goes into getting one of these games, these experiences from idea to classroom.
So these games were originally developed by a Barnard history professor, Mark Carnes, and he created them in the context of a freshman seminar that he was required to teach, and he sort of created the basic framework for the reacting games. Now, after a few years, he told some of his colleagues and some of his friends about it, and he basically made these games available to other instructors, and that was the beginning. But starting about 15 years ago, it got so large that it became clear that there would have to be some formal, organization that was sort of managing this. Anyone is free to write their own game, but it is very time consuming. There's a series of steps of basically a vetting of games. So a game might be developed by an individual or a team of instructors, and then they play it in their own classroom. Then they share it with some friends, and eventually it gets reviewed, peer-reviewed, and there's also a requirement that it is tested at universities other than the ones where the writers are from. And so there's actually a lot of game testing that happens before the games are formally sort of made available to the wider, reacting community.
So there's very thorough, in-depth research into making these very accurate, and so hopefully leading to very effective outcomes.
Absolutely. These are, and there's actually sort of more review of these games than is typical in academia, because there is, a lot of people are looking at it and using it in different kinds of classroom contexts, and now there is also one of the reviewers actually reviews it for historical content and historical accuracy. As you pointed out, these are not plays, right? You're not redoing history. So there's some judgment calls on, you obviously have to make some changes, and sometimes you conflate characters or you leave certain parts of history out. And that you just have to be transparent about it and explain it both in the book and to the students afterwards how you made some alterations in order to make it suitable for a classroom exercise.
Yeah, I really like the way you pointed that out, Andrew, that Dr. Goss, that the games go through testing for their playability. Do they actually work in the classroom, but also for their historical accuracy. And I think you were play testing one that last year we had a discussion, and I jumped in and said, Methodists can't perform marriages in the United Kingdom in 1805 or whatever it was. And so sometimes there are those little things that do get caught because they're being play tested really across the country in all these different contexts. In addition to the formal historical review, you also have all of these informal areas where these professors are using them and catching little things like that.
So how long have you been using reacting in your courses?
I first started using it shortly after I came to Augusta University, and my first try with it was in the fall of 2015 in a world history class. And I actually, the two games that I used that semester in that class, I still use with great results basically every semester.
Yeah, Dr. Goss is being very modest here. He is really the apostle of reacting to our department. I think he had some somewhat skeptical colleagues. And then with the generous support of the university, he was able to take us to a conference where we could play some of the games and understand, excuse me, sorry, my allergies are terrible. We could understand the appeal and the way that these games brought us into the content, but also were incredibly educational. When they work properly, the way they are sort of tilted so that there's an advantage to the people that historically got a certain outcome. They're kind of tilted toward that outcome. But they also leave enough room that you can play it in a way, if you have very good players, really good, then in theory, King Louis could survive the French Revolution for the French Revolution game, in theory. But it also lets you see why that was very unlikely to happen. So, yeah, Dr. Goss really did a great job and persuaded many of the professors in our department, and we have some outside our department now as well, who use these games in their pedagogy.
So you briefly mentioned earlier some of a little bit of the mechanics of the game, but I want to go back to that and go a little more in depth. Can you take us through, your faculty and you want to do this? So where you select a game, so then how does that play out? How are you preparing to integrate this into your course?
So all the games have sort of have two components that you'll need in order to play the game. The first is the so-called game book. This is the book for the students. And so this will include sort of, descriptions of the historical context and some of the debates or the conflict that is taking place, as well as a sort of overview of all of the different kinds of individuals in the game. And the game book for the students will also include the texts, the primary texts, which are to be used. Sometimes they're discussed before the game starts, but they're also useful for the students as they're trying to figure out, well, what would my character say? What kind of ideas would they or arguments would they make? And so some of those are actually published, and the Reacting now has an exclusive publishing arrangement with the University of North Carolina Press. And so there's about 30 or 40 of the games that are published that way, although there are many others that are still in development where there's a PDF and it is possible to get the PDF. So that's the game book. And so you know, obviously if you're using this in a class, you have to sort of make arrangements to make sure the students can get the game book materials, either by ordering the book as a required textbook or by sort of providing the PDF to them. The other part is that there's the instructor manual, which gives the instructor all of the guidance they need in order to set up the game. And there'll be lots of suggestions about how many class periods to set aside for this. And the instructor manual will also include all of the rules sheets. And so in general, most games require at least 10 or 11 students in order to be played. Many of them can be actually played with classes that are larger, that have more than 30 students. And you can do some tricks in order to get it to work in very large classes. And so the instructor who wanted to use this would have to get access to the instructor manual, which for very obvious reasons is behind various password walls, right? Because you don't want the students to be able to pull it down. And the way the reacting now works is that basically for the actually published games, really anyone, any college instructor can get access to the instructor manual. For the games still in development, you do need to be a member of the Reacting Consortium, either an individual member or an institutional member.
And we are an institutional member. Augusta University is an institutional member, just sponsored by the Department of History, Anthropology, and Philosophy. But anyone who's an instructor here at Augusta University can make a login and get access to those resources.
Okay, well that's wonderful. So you get access. You select something that fits your course. What are you kind of doing because this goes over multiple class periods, but it could also be a semester, right? And you can mix different reacting activities together, correct?
Absolutely. Usually, I mean, you can do it in all kinds of different ways. And I have done once I did a class where I did 3 reacting games. Or I might have even done 3.5. But I like using 2 if at all possible. Some classes it doesn't work and I end up only being able to use 1. But I like using 2 where the first game is sort of the warm up. And then the second game is maybe a little bit more complex and allows the students feel a little more comfortable. They know what is going on. And so that, for me, that's the sweet spot. But you could use more than 2. So then I have some conventional parts of all my classes. I have discussions about text, I do lecture as well. But then I've tried to sort of take some of that material out of my class and instead focus on the sort of deep, engaged learning that's possible through these reacting games.
Yeah, and I think one of the strengths of reacting is that, of course, it excites us in a particular way as historians, but there are things that you can use these historical scenarios for that would apply to other disciplines as well. Many of them engage deep philosophical questions. Many of them have really important political lessons. So, obviously political science, philosophy, but just the way that they engage in speaking and writing and learning is also really important. Forgive me. I also want to mention that there are actually some STEM-focused games that are focused around science and written by the one you... Dr. Goss and I gave us a demonstration, which I think you participated in, Andrew, was actually written by 2 chemistry professors. So they're really applicable in a kind of a range of scenarios.
So what is your favorite that you've used?
Ruth, why don't you go first?
I am torn. There are 2 that I really like. One I use in U.S. history and one I use in world history. The one I love for U.S. history is an American Revolution-centered game set in New York in 1775. And you're a member of the New York Assembly, and you're trying to decide if you're going to go with this sort of patriot movement or if you're going to stick with the British Empire. The reason why I love this game is that what students don't know, they just assume that the Patriot movement is the good guys, right? And they don't know some of the complexities that, actually the Loyalists have some really good arguments. And I like that game because it is very 50-50, just as the actual historical scenario was. And the sort of growing realization of the students is, oh my gosh, the American Revolution might not succeed. And maybe that's not a bad thing, is really fun to watch. So that's one. The other one is actually quite a similar scenario that I enjoy, is a French Revolution game that I mentioned before. It's set during the Revolution in France. It's 1791. You're a member of the Legislative Assembly, and you've got to write a constitution. And the students play members of the different factions. You have a very, very revolutionary faction and a conservative faction. And they all think, well, this can't be that hard. We're gonna write a constitution. It'll be easy. What they don't know is they also have to govern the country. So they're out there having these great philosophical debates about, what is the meaning of purpose of government, and then, yeah, but we've got riots here because people are starving because the economy is terrible. So they really have to grapple with what actually happened in the French Revolution. Yes, we have these great and noble ideas, but oh my gosh, we have to make things work as well. And that's just so much fun to play through and really understand that is a classic tension for any kind of government. Your principles, your philosophical debates, but also we got to make sure everybody is fed. So love those games.
It's hard for me to pick a favorite. The one that I probably use the most, and I guess is a favorite, is one that is about the Indian independence. And so this is set right after World War II, and the scenario basically is that the Indian nationalists are trying to figure out what is next for India, and at about the same time, the British decided that they were going to, they were gonna part with India in some way, and so it's a series of debates between there's one or two of the students play the Governor General of the British Governor General of India. And then the other students play Indian nationalists. And the basic tension is between the Indian National Congress, which envisions a unified India under its control, and the Muslim League, who represent or argue that they represent the minority Muslims who live throughout India. And the game is sort of set up to try to steer the students towards creating a unified India, which is not the historical outcome, right? That didn't happen. But the game is sort of it builds in the incentive to basically tempt the students to do better than the British and the Indian nationalists. And there's a lot of, it's a tough game because there are, it features Hindu nationalists who are, who have some positions that are basically strongly anti-Muslim. And there's some other, challenging moments. But it's a way for the students to relate to something that they actually can understand quite well. It's about the relationship between religion and politics, and the religion, politics, and self-rule, coming out of a colonial period, yet in a context that most people are not very familiar with, right? It works well in a world history class because it helps sort of enlighten and teach about this important period in decolonization and Indian history that is not usually something that they're very familiar with from high school history courses. So, and that one is the game elements don't always work. I've actually modified the game. I don't teach it exactly like it was originally envisioned, but that's allowed. There's it's not quite open source material, but the instructors have quite a bit of leeway about how they organize the game. So I will tell the students, well, we're not going to do that component. I've made up my own characters, my own roles. I've emphasized different parts of the debates, and that's been very successful for me.
Come on, Dr. Goss, admit it. The games we like best are the ones with spies.
Well, that's true.
Some of the games have characters who have very secret agendas. And I won't give it anything away here, but it's always a bit of fun when the other students suddenly realize that there is a particular character with lots of information that they really shouldn't have because of espionage.
Yeah, so deception is allowed, and that is unusual. It's very surprising. Students are not used to a classroom exercise where deception is appropriate. But of course, deception is it's a very powerful. It's actually meaningful in and of itself to know that is part of history. But it often just brings the games just slightly out of balance, right, at key moments. That forces everyone to sort of take stock, and that's that's true. That's
it's
very
fun.
Appealing.
Yeah, well, I guess deception is reality.
Well, you can't teach the Cold War without some spies, right?
Yeah, well, there you go. So clearly, students have to think deeply. They have to make a lot of decisions, and so how does a reacting activity help students learn?
Well, for me, the most powerful, the most powerful. Well, there's the game element, right? There is a level of competition, and games are at the heart of humanity, right? Where the games are everywhere, right? And Ruth was already pointing that out. That the things that we think of as being serious are actually, we're games. Revolutions are also games. However, in terms of the learning, I think the most powerful sort of tool is basically the group work. Many of the students, not all of them, but many of them will play in a faction. And I've actually emphasized this more and more. I actually have long faction meetings, right, where the students, especially if they're trying to figure out, what would a Indian nationalist who is from Punjab and is a Muslim, but is allied with the Sikh community, like what would they do? That's actually pretty difficult. So they work together, to try to figure that out. And I'll go over and I'll chat with them, and they'll work it out. Obviously, they have to do some of it themselves. They have to give a speech, but that group element I think is important, and that makes the students get to know each other, and they get to trust each other, and they get to learn together.
Yeah, I would agree that the teamwork and community building of these games really is significant in our classrooms. We struggle sometimes with student engagement here. We're not a traditional campus with some of the traditional things. So anything like this that helps get them more engaged with each other as well as the material is really valuable.
So then what are students saying? What are, at the end of the semester, what are they saying in the reviews that they leave, the instructor reviews? What are they saying in class, amongst each other? What are you hearing?
Well, we get I didn't prepare as well for this one as I should. There's a lot. I mean, the students like these activities. They come to class, right? They feel like they have a stake in their own learning in this way, in a way that a lecture doesn't do the same thing for them. So there tends to be, and what I've found is, not everyone likes it, right? There might be 10% of the students who would rather I not do this, or that but that's a small number. And of course, any pedagogy you're going to use will have people who like it less. What I found is that I do get students to take a different class with me, right? They follow me around in part because of the reacting games. So that's meaningful for me, and it also means that in many classes, almost always, I have students who have already played a reacting game before, either in one of my classes or in one of my colleagues' classes, and so then that they're already ready for it, and that sort of allows them to be even more serious and more engaged.
I will just follow that up with a story from teaching reacting semester. A few years ago, in which the students, I had a lot of students who were initially very skeptical. And when I do reacting, I like to give the students a kind of a survey before I start and ask them, what kind of roles would you be comfortable with or not comfortable with? Because I try to meet them where they are. And I had one student who, in her first survey, was like, I don't really want to speak. I don't really want to do any of these things. She was very, very uncertain. And we talked about it, and she was worried about her GPA. Understandable. This is a new thing. How will I succeed in this class? I don't know. I don't have any data. I know how to handle a lecture class. I know how to handle other things. I don't know what I'll do here. When I got to the second game I played two, and I gave everyone the survey. She sent hers back to me with, I'll play anything, YOLO. You only live once. And it was just so great to see someone who at first is like, I don't know what this is going to be like. This is amazing. This is fun. This is engaging. And I am actually learning something here. So I think about her a lot because I think a lot of students have that kind of initial, I'm not too sure what this is. I've never seen this before, to being like, hey, this was a great experience.
That's wonderful. And that's what it's about, right?
Exactly.
So what are the subjects that reacting activities cover? There's a pretty broad availability, correct?
There is. I mean, some things probably are not suited for a reacting game or any kind of game, right? Even in the history field, and so there needs to be some kind of debate, political or intellectual debate, that structures it, because the games are built basically from a foundation of two sides, right? And not all of them have two sides; some of them have more, but there has to be some kind of issue that is debated. However, there have been games developed about just about everything in history. There are a lot of games, of course, created for U.S. history and European history. There's now more that are available for Asian history and African and South American. And as Ruth was pointing out earlier, there are a great number of games that are not just suitable for a history class. There are games that have been developed around novels and sort of appropriate for a literature class. And there's a Shakespeare game, I think, actually. Right?
There's a wonderful game about Shakespeare versus Marlowe, in which the students get to learn that there is a guy other than Shakespeare. There are other, and they're sort of in competition to produce a play, and the students have to kind of engage deeply with these plays by Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare. So that might be very suitable for a literature class, for example. Yes, and there are others that, as we mentioned, kind of explore deep philosophical moments around the birth of democracy in Athens. That's a very popular game. Right. And there are others that explore the deaths of democracies. There's one set in late Weimar Germany where the students play through, and you sort of realize that it's going to be very difficult to save this democracy from the forces that are out to get it. So, as you mentioned, those big philosophical questions, literature, but also STEM public policy. I think the game that we played, that you came to, Andrew, was very much about making public policy around health and science. And you realize that just having the science on your side is not enough to win the political debate. So those could be very helpful for students in areas relating to those, to public health or to making, our health, society, and policy classes, for example. There's a lot of applicability, I think.
Anything else to share on that or on any part of reacting that we didn't cover?
Yeah, one of the games that I've started to use in my history of medicine class covers the cholera outbreak in London in the 1850s, and it foregrounds the role of John Snow and basically this is a famous instance of the moment where it became clear that water was carrying the disease. And this is a classic sort of lesson from public health and it was actually developed. The game was developed by some biology professors, and so there, that has that works in a history class, but it could work in a broad range of health classes as well.
Wonderful. Well, let's take a short break. We'll come back with our continuing the conversation question.
The Open Paws Food Pantry provides food and toiletry items for any currently enrolled Augusta University student who visits one of the 2 pantry locations. Please consider donating needed items such as non-perishable food and drink, hygiene products, and school supplies. Donations may be dropped off at either location, on the Somerville campus in Bellevue Hall and on the Health Sciences campus on the 2nd floor of the Student Center. Both locations are open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. If you know a student who may need assistance, they can find more information by visiting augusta.edu and search for Open Paws, or by stopping by one of the pantry locations.
As we wrap up, I want to ask y'all our continuing the conversation question, which is, how can interested faculty get started using reacting to the past in their courses?
Well, I think the one of the first things to do is to visit the Reacting Consortium website. That's reactingconsortium.org, and that will have both an introduction to the pedagogy, but it will list also all of the games that are currently available. And it's also possible, if you're an instructor, to create a login, and so that takes a little bit of time because the staff, the Reacting Consortium, has to verify that you're actually not a student but a faculty member. And for AU, for Augusta University faculty and staff, or anyone who's teaching here, it's possible, since we're members of the consortium, to get access to all of the games. But for folks who are not members of the consortium, it's still possible to make a login, and you can get access to the game materials for the published games.
Yeah, and just to also speak to how do you get started with this, making the login, looking at the games, browsing them, thinking about the possibilities. You can get a sense of how long they will take in your classroom because the site gives you that information. Is this something that I can do in 2 weeks? Is this a 3-week scenario? Is this a 2-day scenario? Those sorts of issues for thinking ahead. In terms of planning on these, I do recommend that as you're sort of thinking of your syllabus the semester ahead, you would want to get access and look very carefully at all the materials, the instructor manual as well as the player manual and the player character sheets, because every student gets a character sheet giving them instructions as well. And for those of people in the Augusta University community, really, I think another thing you might do is just reach out to those of us who are somewhat experienced with reacting, Dr. Goss, myself, and we would be happy to kind of coach folks a little bit. If you've never DM'd a D&D game, this may seem very overwhelming to kind of run a game, but we can help you break that down a little bit, I think. Is that true?
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone should feel free to reach out to me via email would probably be best. And I'll just add to that, it sounds a little intimidating getting started on this, but it's not as bad as you think. The reacting to the past pedagogy, the sort of the origins come from Mark Carnes, and he was and is not a gamer. So this was a pedagogy that was not created by gamers, and it is very accessible. It's very easy to get started, and once you get moving, it's actually fairly intuitive because it's basically a debate class that has been, souped up. I agree with Ruth that looking at the instructor manual and the game materials well ahead of time is probably appropriate and necessary, just to give you a sense of how you're going to fit it into your class.
Do you need, if it's spring now, do I need the summertime to plan this to get it into my fall course?
Well, it depends. So the challenge that I think many instructors will have is that if they're teaching a class they've taught before, these games are likely to take at least 2 weeks. So that means that something, they might have to make some modifications. Now, I can tell you from experience that it's well worth it. I do teach less content about world history than I used to, but there's a net positive by instead using these games. The students, I still teach, historical content about world history or whatever I'm teaching, but these games, they do require some reorganization of the syllabus, and that usually does, it would be wise to do that ahead of time.
Great. Well, thank you both for this great conversation about reacting to the past activities. What platforms can listeners connect with you on?
I'm on Twitter at Dr. McNugent. If you want to connect with me there, that's fine, or email as with Dr. Goss. We're both on the History, Anthropology, and Philosophy website.
Great. I also want to thank our listeners. Please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, and share. Speaking of higher ed, we release new episodes the third Wednesday of each month in spring and fall semesters, and you can find the resources we discussed today on our show page at augusta.edu/innovation. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/AUGCII, and you can email us at cii@augusta.edu with ideas for future episodes or questions about this episode. Just add podcast to the subject line. Speaking of Higher Ed is produced by the Center for Instructional Innovation at Augusta University.